I was the mother of the groom. Yet on my son's wedding day, my daughter-in-law pointed toward a table beside the catering staff and said, "That's where you'll be sitting, Martha." At first, I thought she was joking. She wasn't, while her family smiled from the front row tables. I was escorted to a seat near the kitchen doors, hidden behind a large decorative pillar where hardly anyone could see me. The humiliation burned through my chest, but I sat down without arguing, because Brittany Collins had no idea that every flower, every crystal chandelier, every gourmet meal, and every minute of that luxury wedding had been paid for by me. And before the night was over, everyone would learn the truth. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to hear from you. Now, if this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my position? Would you have walked out, or stayed silent like I did? And while you're there, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with people from different places. My name is Martha Sinclair, and for most of my life, I never asked for much. Not wealth, not luxury, not recognition. All I ever wanted was for my son to have a better life than the one I had. Looking back now, I suppose that's what most mothers want, especially mothers who have spent years raising a child alone. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't much to look at, but every wall carried memories. Some beautiful, some painful. I moved into that house with my husband, Daniel Sinclair, when we were both young and hopeful. We dreamed about growing old together there. Life had other plans. Daniel died suddenly from a heart attack when he was only 43 years old. One ordinary Tuesday morning, he kissed me goodbye before work. That evening, a police officer was standing on my porch. I still remember the sound of the rain that night. I remember the officer's face. I remember feeling my knees buckle beneath me. Most of all, I remember looking over at my son Ethan, who was only 9 years old at the time. He was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, completely unaware that his entire world had just changed. Mine too. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep after Ethan had gone to bed. There were mornings when I stared at bills spread across the kitchen table and wondered how I was going to keep the lights on. I had no wealthy relatives, no hidden inheritance, no safety net, just determination and a little sewing machine for years. I worked as a seamstress from a small shop I eventually opened myself. The sign outside simply said, Sinclair Alterations. Nothing fancy, but people trusted me. I hemmed wedding dresses, repaired uniforms, tailored business suits. Sometimes I worked 14-hour days, sometimes longer. I would come home exhausted, my fingers aching from hours of stitching. Yet every time I saw Ethan sleeping peacefully in his room, I reminded myself why I kept going. He was worth every sacrifice, every missed vacation, every old coat I wore for another year, every dream I postponed. As Ethan grew older, he understood more than I realized. When he was 16, he got a part-time job at a grocery store. Not because I asked him to, because he wanted to help. I still remember the day he handed me $200 from his first paycheck. "Mama," he said softly, You've carried us long enough. I cried the entire night after that, not because of the money, because I knew I had raised a good man, a grateful man, the kind of man his father would have been proud of. Ethan worked hard in school, earned scholarships, graduated from college with honors. Eventually, he became a civil engineer. The day he received his first major promotion, he drove 3 hours just to take me to dinner and celebrate. That's who Ethan was. Or at least, who he had always been. Every Sunday, he called me. Every birthday, he showed up. Every holiday, he made sure I wasn't alone. Friends often told me how lucky I was, and I knew they were right. For many years, Ethan wasn't just my son. He was my best friend. That's why I never expected things to change. Not the way they eventually did. The first sign came when Ethan called me one evening and said he wanted me to meet someone special. I could hear excitement in his voice. The kind of excitement only love creates. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." I laughed. "Well, it's about time." He laughed too. Then he said her name, Brittany Collins. At first, I was thrilled. Honestly, I had spent years hoping Ethan would find someone who loved him as much as I did. Someone kind, someone loyal, someone who would stand beside him through every challenge life could throw their way. A few weeks later, Ethan invited me to dinner. I remember spending an hour choosing what to wear. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I wanted Ethan's girlfriend to know she mattered to me, that I was making an effort. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted them immediately. Ethan stood and waved. His smile lit up the room, and beside him sat Brittany. Beautiful, elegant, perfectly dressed, the kind of woman who seemed to belong on magazine covers. She greeted me warmly. Her smile was flawless. Her manners were impeccable, at least at first. The dinner itself went well enough. We talked about work, travel, family, future plans. But every now and then, I noticed something. A look, a pause, a slight tightening around her smile. Small things most people would never notice. But I did. Years of working with customers had taught me how to read people. And something about Brittany felt rehearsed, carefully controlled, as if every word had been selected in advance. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being protective. After all, what mother doesn't worry when another woman suddenly becomes the most important person in her son's life? Over the next year, Ethan talked about Brittany constantly. Their vacations, their plans, their dreams. And every time he mentioned her, he sounded happy. That should have been enough for me. Maybe it would have been, if not for the little changes I started noticing. At first, they were easy to dismiss. A missed Sunday phone call, a canceled dinner, a holiday visit shortened because Brittany had other plans. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just tiny shifts, like hairline cracks forming in a foundation. The kind you barely notice until one day the whole structure starts leaning. One evening, I sat alone on my porch watching the sunset. Ethan had canceled our weekly dinner for the third time that month. I told him it was fine, and I meant it. Mostly. But after hanging up, I found myself staring at the empty chair across from me. The chair where Daniel used to sit. The chair where Ethan often sat now when he visited. For the first time in years, the house felt bigger, quieter, lonelier. I didn't know it then, but that loneliness was only the beginning, because soon I would meet Brittany's family. And the moment I did, I would realize that the woman my son planned to marry was carrying far more baggage than I ever imagined. Baggage that would eventually lead to the most humiliating day of my entire life. The day I was told to sit with the staff at my own son's wedding. The first time I met Brittany's parents, I understood exactly where she had learned to smile without warmth. It happened about 3 months after Ethan introduced me to her. By then, they were already serious. Very serious. Serious enough that Ethan was talking about moving in with her. Serious enough that I could hear wedding bells hiding somewhere in the future. One Sunday afternoon, Brittany invited me to a family dinner at her parents' home. "It'll be great," Ethan assured me over the phone. "My parents are excited to meet you," Brittany added. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first lie she ever told me. The Collins family lived in an upscale suburb outside Cincinnati. The neighborhood alone made it obvious these people lived differently than I did. Large homes, perfectly manicured lawns, luxury vehicles parked in spotless driveways. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. I arrived carrying a homemade peach pie, the same recipe my mother had taught me when I was a girl. I remember standing at the front door holding that pie and feeling slightly nervous. Not because I was intimidated, because I genuinely wanted them to like me. The door opened. A tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair greeted me. Victoria Collins, Brittany's mother. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes weren't. "Oh," she said. For a brief second, disappointment flashed across her face. Then the smile returned. "Martha, welcome." The way she said my name felt strange, polite, yet somehow dismissive at the same time. I couldn't explain it then. I could later. Inside. The house looked like a luxury furniture showroom. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, fresh flowers everywhere. Not a single thing looked out of place. I followed Victoria into a massive dining room where Richard Collins was waiting. Richard shook my hand warmly enough. Unlike his wife, he seemed quiet, almost passive. The type of man who had spent years learning it was easier not to argue. Dinner began pleasantly, at least on the surface. Richard asked about Ethan's work. Victoria discussed local charities. Brittany talked about her marketing career. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. But beneath the conversation, I could feel something else. Evaluation. Observation. Judgment. At one point, Victoria asked how I spent my time. I owned a tailoring shop for many years. I explained. Oh, there it was again. That little word. That little pause. That tiny expression. How interesting. Interesting. Not impressive. Not admirable. Interesting. The way people describe a hobby, not a career that fed a family for decades. I smiled anyway. I enjoyed it. Victoria sipped her wine. I suppose working with your hands must be satisfying. Something about the sentence bothered me. Not the words. The tone. as if she were complimenting a talented gardener or a housekeeper, not someone who had built a business from nothing. I let it go. Then came the second moment, the one I couldn't ignore. Brittany was showing everyone photos from a recent work conference in New York. Beautiful hotels, fancy restaurants, corporate events. I genuinely meant it when I said they looked wonderful. Victoria smiled at her daughter. "You've always belonged in that world." Then she glanced toward me. "You know, Brittany has always had expensive tastes." The table laughed politely. I smiled. Victoria continued, "Not everyone understands luxury the way Brittany does." For a second, nobody spoke. The comment floated through the room like cigarette smoke. Thin, subtle, impossible to grab, yet impossible to miss. Ethan seemed oblivious. Richard looked down at his plate. Brittany said nothing. And I understood something important. People often reveal themselves not through what they say, but through what they allow others to say. The evening continued. More stories, more wine, more laughter. But I noticed a pattern. Whenever I spoke about practical things, Victoria changed the subject. Whenever Brittany spoke about success or status, Victoria lit up. Everything revolved around appearances. Everything revolved around image. Everything revolved around what people thought. By the time I drove home that night, I felt exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. I kept replaying the evening in my head. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe they were simply different from me. I wanted to believe that. For Ethan's sake. But over the following months, the pattern continued. The comments became more frequent, more pointed, more difficult to dismiss. One afternoon, Brittany came shopping with me. Ethan had asked her to help me choose a dress for an upcoming company banquet where he was receiving an award. I thought it would be a nice opportunity for us to bond. Instead, it became another warning sign. I picked up a navy blue dress. Simple, elegant, affordable. Brittany barely glanced at it. "Oh no," I laughed. "What?" She smiled. "You don't want something that... conservative." Conservative. There was that tone again. I set the dress down. She immediately pointed toward another rack. A designer label. The price was nearly $600. I almost choked. "Brittany, that's more than I spent on groceries some months when Ethan was growing up." She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Well, that's probably why you've never experienced real fashion." The words landed like a slap. She smiled afterward as if she'd made a harmless joke. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize what she'd just said, waiting for an apology. It never came. Instead, she moved on to another dress, as if nothing had happened. That night, I almost called Ethan. Almost, but I didn't, because I knew what he would say. "Mom, she didn't mean it that way." Or, "You're misunderstanding her." Or, "She's just joking." I didn't want to put him in the middle, so I stayed quiet. Again. Months passed. Their relationship grew stronger. Their engagement followed shortly after. The proposal happened during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Ethan called me immediately afterward, moments after Brittany posted photos online. His voice overflowed with happiness. She said yes. I remember forcing enthusiasm into my voice. And part of me truly was happy. Ethan deserved love. He deserved a family. He deserved joy. But another part of me felt uneasy. Not because of Brittany, because of what Brittany represented. The values I kept seeing, the obsession with appearances, the fixation on status, the constant measuring of people's worth through money. A few days later, I attended an engagement celebration hosted by the Collins family. That was the night I heard something that truly unsettled me. I was walking toward the patio when I overheard Victoria speaking to one of her friends. She didn't know I was nearby. Brittany has done very well for herself. The friend nodded. Victoria lowered her voice. Let's just say Ethan is fortunate to be marrying into this family. The women laughed. My stomach tightened. Fortunate. As if my son had won a prize. As if he weren't successful, educated, kind, and hardworking in his own right. As if the Collins family was somehow elevating him. That was the moment I realized something. Victoria didn't merely look down on me. She looked down on all of us, on the entire Sinclair family. And unfortunately, Brittany seemed to share more of her mother's beliefs than I wanted to admit. Still, Ethan was happy. So I stayed silent. I smiled. I attended dinners. I played my role. And I convinced myself everything would work out. I had no idea that the real trouble hadn't even begun. Because soon, the wedding planning would start. And with it would come a secret about money, pride, and appearances that would change everything. A week after the engagement party, Ethan showed up at my house looking exhausted. Not physically exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles behind a person's eyes. The kind that comes from carrying a burden you don't know how to share. I noticed it the moment he walked through my front door. Everything okay? I asked. He forced a smile. Of course. I raised an eyebrow. Mothers know when their children are lying. That earned a small laugh. But only a small one. I made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table where he had done homework as a boy. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. A long, heavy sigh. And suddenly, I knew something was wrong. What is it? Ethan. He rubbed his forehead. The wedding. I wasn't surprised. Weddings had a way of turning happy people into stressed people. What about it? He hesitated. Then the words started pouring out. The budget keeps growing. I frowned. How much growing? His laugh was bitter. You don't want to know. Actually, I did. Very much. So I waited. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out several papers. Spreadsheets, vendor estimates, contracts. The numbers nearly made me choke on my coffee. The venue alone cost more than I had paid for my house. The flowers looked like the budget for a small car. And the catering bill, I stared at it twice to make sure I wasn't misreading the digits. Ethan. He nodded miserably. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the obvious question. Why does it have to be this expensive? He looked uncomfortable. Brittany wants something special. Special. I had heard that word before. Usually right before someone spent money they didn't actually have. And her parents. Another uncomfortable silence. That told me everything. A few days later, I learned even more. Not intentionally. It happened during a wedding planning meeting Brittany insisted I attend. One of many meetings that would eventually make me regret saying yes. The meeting took place at a luxury hotel downtown. Lauren Bennett, the wedding planner, sat across from us. She was professional, organized, and surprisingly kind. Unlike some people in the room, Victoria Collins immediately took control of the discussion. We absolutely need the upgraded floral package. Lauren nodded. Of course. And the premium lighting? Certainly. And the imported crystal centerpieces? Lauren scribbled notes. Every suggestion seemed to add another $5,000, another $10,000, another $15,000. The total kept climbing, yet something felt strange. Every time Lauren mentioned deposits or payment deadlines, Victoria's enthusiasm faded. Only briefly, but enough for me to notice. Eventually, Lauren asked a simple question. When would you like to finalize the financial arrangements? For a split second, the room became awkward. Victoria glanced at Richard. Richard looked at Brittany. Brittany looked at Ethan. Nobody answered. Lauren smiled politely. Whenever you're ready. The meeting moved on, but I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Something wasn't adding up. Later that evening, Ethan called me. His voice sounded strained again. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything? If someone loved you, would they expect you to go into debt for a wedding? The question broke my heart, because I knew he wasn't asking hypothetically. He was asking personally. I took a deep breath. No. Silence. Then, I've been looking at loans. My stomach dropped. Ethan, I don't know what else to do. The words hit me harder than I expected. I knew how hard he had worked to build his life. I knew how carefully he managed money. I knew how much he wanted this marriage to start on the right foot. And now, he was considering burying himself in debt before he even said, I do. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Then, by complete accident, I discovered the truth. The discovery happened when Lauren called me one afternoon. She thought she was speaking privately. She wasn't expecting what she revealed. I'm trying to reach someone from the Collins family, she said. There's an issue regarding one of the deposits. I asked a few questions, carefully, casually. What I learned shocked me. The Collins family wasn't nearly as wealthy as they pretended to be. They lived comfortably, very comfortably, but not extravagantly. Not the way Victoria constantly implied. The luxury lifestyle she projected was largely built on appearances. Credit, refinancing, image, keeping up with people around her. The wedding wasn't being designed to celebrate Ethan and Brittany. It was being designed to impress everyone else. And suddenly, everything made sense. The obsession with status, The endless upgrades, the comments, the judgments, the need to appear important. Victoria wasn't building a wedding. She was building a performance. The problem was that Ethan was being asked to pay for the stage. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet. The same house where I had spent decades saving every dollar possible. I thought about the sacrifices, the long hours, the business, the investments I had carefully built over the years. People often assumed I was poor because I lived modestly. I never corrected them. There was no need. What most people didn't know was that careful saving over decades can accomplish remarkable things. I wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but I was comfortable. Very comfortable. Especially after selling my tailoring business several years earlier. I had retirement accounts, investments, savings, enough to live securely, enough to help my son if he truly needed me. The next morning, I called Ethan. "Come over." An hour later, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. I placed a folder in front of him. "What is this? Open it." He did. Then he stared. His eyes widened, then widened even more. "Mom." Inside was documentation showing the funds I was prepared to use. Not for myself, for him, for the wedding. His face turned pale. "No." "Yes." "No. Absolutely not." I smiled. "You sound just like your father." He pushed the folder back. "I can't take this." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You can." Tears appeared in his eyes. "Mom, this is too much." "No." I squeezed his hand. "You are my son." His voice cracked. "You've already done enough." I shook my head. I decide what's enough. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you." The words carried years of love inside them, years of trust, years of family. Then I gave him one condition, one very important condition. No one can know. He frowned. "What?" "No announcements, no speeches, no credit." "Why?" "Because I already knew Victoria Collins. Because I already knew Brittany. Because I didn't want gratitude. And because I wanted to see who people really were when they believed I had nothing to offer. I just don't want attention." That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. A few days later, Ethan introduced me to Lauren officially as the primary financial sponsor. The paperwork was handled quietly, discreetly, professionally. No fanfare, no public acknowledgement, exactly the way I wanted. Only 3 people knew the truth. Lauren, Ethan, and me. At the time, it seemed like a simple decision. A loving mother's gift. I had no idea that secrecy would eventually become the very thing that allowed Brittany to humiliate me. Because once the money started flowing, something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming grateful, Brittany became even more demanding. And soon, I would begin disappearing from my own son's wedding. One decision at a time. For a brief moment after I agreed to help pay for the wedding, I convinced myself things would improve. I thought the pressure would disappear. I thought Brittany would become more relaxed, more grateful, maybe even kinder. I was wrong. If anything, the opposite happened. The larger the wedding budget became, the smaller my role seemed to get. At first, the changes were subtle. A meeting I wasn't invited to, a decision made without asking my opinion, a venue tour that happened while I somehow forgot to receive the schedule. None of those things seemed important by themselves. After all, it wasn't my wedding. I reminded myself of that repeatedly. But as the weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Lauren Bennett called me. She sounded stressed. "Martha, I just wanted to verify the floral upgrade." I frowned. "What floral upgrade?" There was a pause. "The premium package?" Another pause. "The one Brittany approved yesterday." I stared out my kitchen window. "How much is it?" Lauren told me. I nearly dropped my phone. The upgrade alone cost more than my first car. For flowers. Flowers that would die within days. I closed my eyes. "Okay," I said quietly. Lauren hesitated. "Are you sure?" I knew she was asking more than a financial question. She was asking if I was comfortable, if I was being taken advantage of, if I truly understood what was happening. But I answered the same way I always did. "It's fine." The next week, it was the lighting package, then the entertainment, then custom welcome gifts for guests, then imported table decorations. Every time I thought the spending had reached its limit, Brittany found a new way to spend more. The strange thing was that she never seemed concerned about the cost. Not once. Not ever. That bothered me, because people who earn money usually respect money. People who sacrifice for money definitely respect money. But Brittany treated it like an unlimited resource, like numbers on a screen, not hours of someone's life, not years of work. One evening, I attended another planning session. By that point, I was beginning to dread them. The meeting was held at a luxury event showroom. Brittany stood beside a display table covered in crystal decorations. Victoria stood proudly next to her. Lauren was taking notes. I arrived 10 minutes early. No one noticed. Or at least, no one acknowledged me. Brittany was busy discussing linen fabrics. Apparently, there were multiple shades of white. Who knew? I quietly took a seat. The conversation continued for nearly 15 minutes before Brittany finally glanced in my direction. "Oh." Just, "oh." No greeting, no smile, no acknowledgement. Just, "oh." I suddenly felt like a stranger at someone else's event. Lauren, to her credit, greeted me warmly. "Martha, glad you could make it." Brittany barely looked up. "We've already made most of the decisions." I smiled politely. "That's fine." What I wanted to say was, "Then why invite me?" But I stayed silent. Again. The meeting continued. At one point, I suggested a small family photo display featuring both sides of the family. Photos of grandparents, parents, childhood memories. The kind of thing that adds heart to a wedding. Brittany immediately shook her head. "No." The answer came so quickly, it startled me. Victoria nodded. "I agree." I blinked. "Oh," Brittany continued. "It doesn't really fit the aesthetic." The aesthetic. Apparently, family memories were less important than matching decorations. I felt foolish for even suggesting it. Lauren looked uncomfortable, but she said nothing. What could she say? The bride had spoken. A week later came another incident, one that stayed with me far longer. I was helping Ethan review some final details. He looked exhausted. Wedding planning had become a second full-time job. While he stepped away to answer a phone call, I found myself alone near a group of Brittany's friends. They didn't know I could hear them. One woman asked an innocent question. "So, who's paying for all this?" I froze. Brittany laughed. A light, dismissive laugh. "My parents are helping." Victoria smiled proudly. Another friend nodded. "That makes sense. This wedding is incredible." Then came the sentence that stayed in my mind for weeks. "At least you don't have to rely on Ethan's side." The group laughed, and Brittany didn't correct them. Not once. She didn't say, "Actually, Ethan's family has helped." She didn't say Martha has been incredibly generous. She didn't say anything. She simply smiled. That smile told me everything. I quietly walked away before anyone noticed me. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The television played in the background. I wasn't watching it. I kept replaying Brittany's words, or rather, her silence. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. I wasn't angry because nobody knew the truth. That had been my choice. What hurt was watching someone accept credit she hadn't earned. Watching her allow people to believe my family contributed nothing. Watching her reinforce the exact stereotype Victoria already believed. That we were somehow less sophisticated, less successful, less worthy. The truth was almost laughable. The wedding couldn't have happened without me. Yet somehow, I was becoming invisible inside it. The situation grew worse as the wedding approached. Every week seemed to bring another example, another slight, another reminder. Then came the seating discussion. At the time, I had no idea how important seating arrangements would become. Lauren was reviewing table placements. Family tables, friends, co-workers, relatives. I noticed something strange. My seat wasn't listed yet. I assumed it simply hadn't been finalized. No big deal. Weeks remained before the wedding. Still, something about it felt odd. Everyone else's place seemed decided. Mine remained blank. I almost asked Lauren about it. Almost. But I didn't. Instead, I ignored the feeling. A mistake I would later regret. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan visited unexpectedly. He looked happier than he had in weeks. For the first time in a while, I saw the old Ethan, the boy I remembered. We spent hours talking on the porch about work, sports, life. Nothing wedding related. At one point, he smiled and said, "Mom, thank you." For what? For everything. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke my heart because I realized something. Ethan truly didn't know what was happening. He didn't see the comments, the exclusion, the disrespect. He was too busy trying to keep everyone happy, too busy building a future, too busy trusting the woman he loved. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, every insult, every slight, every uncomfortable moment. But I couldn't. Not yet. I refused to become the mother who forced her son to choose sides. So I swallowed my feelings and smiled. The same way I always had. What I didn't know was that someone else had already started making decisions about my place in the wedding. Decisions Ethan knew nothing about. Decisions that would soon leave me humiliated in front of hundreds of people. And the first warning sign was only days away. A phone call from Lauren Bennett that would change everything. 10 days before the wedding, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was folding laundry while an old jazz station played softly in the background. The caller ID showed Lauren Bennett. At first, I assumed she was calling about another payment approval. By then, those calls had become routine. I answered with a smile. "Hi, Lauren." Her response came a second too late. "Hi, Martha." Immediately, I sensed something was wrong. Over the previous months, I had come to know Lauren fairly well. She was organized, direct, professional. But now she sounded hesitant, nervous, almost guilty. I set the laundry basket down. What happened? A pause. Then another. "Martha." I wasn't sure whether I should call. My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She exhaled slowly. "It's about the seating chart." For a moment, I almost laughed. The seating chart of all the things that could go wrong, that seemed insignificant. "Okay." Another pause. Then Lauren said something that made my heart sink. "Your seat has been changed." I frowned. "What do you mean?" More silence. The kind of silence that usually arrives before bad news. Then Lauren spoke carefully. "As of yesterday, Brittany requested several adjustments." I walked to the kitchen table and sat down. Something in her voice told me this wasn't a minor change. "What kind of adjustments?" Lauren hesitated. Then she said, "You've been moved from the family table." The words hit harder than I expected. For several seconds, I simply stared out the window. Family table. The table where parents sat. The table where grandparents sat. The table where the people closest to the bride and groom belonged. The table where a mother should sit at her son's wedding. "Where am I now?" I asked quietly. Lauren didn't answer immediately, and that terrified me more than anything. Finally, she spoke. "Near the service entrance." I blinked. "I'm sorry." She sounded miserable. "Near the back section of the ballroom." I felt cold, completely cold. "Near the kitchen." Lauren's silence gave me the answer. For a moment, I genuinely thought there must be a mistake. There had to be. No bride would intentionally place her future mother-in-law beside the kitchen staff. Not unless... No. Even then, no. "Lauren." My voice sounded distant. "Why?" She sighed heavily. I could hear genuine discomfort. I asked Brittany the same question. I waited. Lauren continued. "She said the family table was becoming crowded." I laughed. A short, humorless laugh. Crowded. The ballroom could seat nearly 300 people. Yet somehow, there wasn't room for the groom's mother. The excuse was absurd. and both Lauren and I knew it. "What else did she say?" Lauren was quiet. "Then, are you sure you want to know?" That answer told me everything. "Yes." A long silence followed. Then Lauren finally spoke. She said she wanted the front tables to look a certain way. I closed my eyes. A certain way. Not family. Not love. Not relationships. Appearance. Always appearance. I could almost hear Victoria Collins speaking through her daughter. "What does that mean exactly?" Lauren hesitated. Again. Then she lowered her voice. She said some guests fit the image she was trying to create. My chest tightened. "And I don't—" Lauren didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren surprised me. "I'm sorry, Martha." The sincerity in her voice nearly broke me. I shouldn't be apologizing for someone else's decision, but I'm sorry. I swallowed hard. "Thank you. You've been wonderful throughout this entire process." That hurt even more, because kindness always hurts when it arrives in the middle of cruelty. I stared at the wedding calendar hanging on my refrigerator. 10 days. Just 10 days. 10 days before my son's wedding. 10 days before I would watch him start a new chapter of his life. And somehow, despite everything I had done, I was being pushed into a corner. Literally. I thanked Lauren for calling. Then I hung up. The house suddenly felt very quiet. Too quiet. I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour. Not moving, not thinking, just sitting. Eventually, I walked into my bedroom and opened an old cedar chest. Inside were photographs. Memories. Pieces of a life. There was a photo of Ethan at age 5, missing his front tooth. There was another from his high school graduation. Another from college. Another from the day he received his engineering license. I looked at every picture, every milestone, every sacrifice, every victory. And I kept asking myself the same question. How had we ended up here? How had the mother who raised him become an embarrassment? What had I done wrong? The answer came quickly. Nothing. I had done nothing wrong. That realization should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything hurt more. Because if I hadn't done anything wrong, then Brittany's decision wasn't about my actions. It was about who she believed I was. A woman without status, without influence, without sophistication. A woman she could move aside because she assumed nobody would object. Least of all, me. The next day, Ethan called. The sound of his voice immediately softened something inside me. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart. How's your week going?" For a brief moment, I considered telling him everything. The seating arrangement, the insult, the humiliation. Everything. The words rose right to the surface. Then I imagined his reaction. The anger. The confrontation. The possibility of a massive argument days before the wedding. I couldn't do it. Not to him. Not then. So I lied. "It's going fine." We talked for 20 minutes. Work. Weather. Football. Nothing important. When we hung up, I felt both relieved and ashamed. Relieved because I had protected him. ashamed, because I was protecting people who didn't deserve it. 3 days later, Lauren called again. This time, her voice sounded even worse. "Martha?" "Yes?" "I just wanted to make sure you received the final seating chart." I checked my email. When I opened the attachment, my heart sank. There it was, in black and white, table 27, near the rear service corridor, beside vendor seating, beside catering staff. Not even close to Ethan. Not even close to the family section. I stared at the screen. The humiliation felt strangely physical, as if someone had placed a weight directly on my chest. "Do you want me to say something?" Lauren asked quietly. The question surprised me. "What do you mean?" I can push back. I smiled sadly. "No, Martha. No." I took a deep breath. "It's her wedding." The words tasted bitter. Lauren was silent. Finally, she said, "I don't think you're seeing this the way I am." "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then she answered, "I think Brittany believes there will never be consequences." Those words stayed with me. Long after the call ended. Long after the evening arrived. Long after I climbed into bed. Because deep down, I knew Lauren was right. Brittany wasn't simply moving a chair. She was testing boundaries, testing respect, testing how much humiliation another person would tolerate. What she didn't know was that her assumptions were built on a lie I had helped create, because she still believed I was merely an aging widow with little influence and even less importance. She still believed her family had all the power, and 10 days later, she would act on that belief in front of hundreds of people. What neither of us knew was that someone else had already noticed the truth. Someone who had seen every contract, every invoice, every payment authorization. Someone who understood exactly who had made the wedding possible. And that person would soon become very important. The morning of Ethan's wedding arrived with clear blue skies and sunshine. The kind of perfect weather people pray for when planning an outdoor ceremony. I woke before dawn, not because I had to, because I couldn't sleep. For a few moments, I simply lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Pride, love, sadness, anxiety, excitement, all tangled together. My little boy was getting married. No matter what had happened over the previous months, that truth still mattered. It mattered more than anything. I slowly climbed out of bed and walked toward the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The same chest I had opened countless times throughout Ethan's life. Inside were memories, photographs, letters, treasures accumulated over decades. But that morning, I reached for one particular item, a small velvet box. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside rested an antique gold pocket watch. It had belonged to Daniel, my husband, Ethan's father. The watch wasn't especially valuable, at least not financially, but sentimentally, it was priceless. Daniel carried it every day for nearly 20 years. After he died, I carefully stored it away, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the day Ethan became a husband himself. That day had finally arrived. I held the watch in my hands and felt tears gathering in my eyes. "Your father would be proud of you," I whispered. The empty room offered no reply. Still, somehow, I felt Daniel's presence. Maybe grief never truly leaves. Maybe love doesn't either. After a long shower, I prepared for the wedding. My dress hung neatly on the closet door. Simple, elegant, navy blue. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designer. Just tasteful and appropriate. Exactly the kind of dress I liked. As I fastened a small pearl necklace around my neck, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked older than she felt. Gray streaks threaded through her hair. Fine lines framed her eyes. The years had left their marks. But those years had also built something stronger. Resilience, strength, character. Things no expensive dress could buy. I smiled softly. Then I picked up the velvet box and placed it carefully inside my purse. The drive to the venue took nearly 40 minutes. The wedding was being held at an exclusive country estate outside Cincinnati, a sprawling property filled with gardens, fountains, and breathtaking architecture. Naturally, Brittany had fallen in love with it immediately. Naturally, it had cost a fortune. As I approached the entrance, luxury cars lined the driveway. Valets hurried from vehicle to vehicle. Guests in formal attire filled the grounds. Everything looked exactly as Brittany had envisioned. Perfect. Polished. Elegant. A wedding magazine come to life. I parked and took a deep breath before stepping out of my car. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to focus on the positive. Today was about Ethan. Not Brittany, not Victoria, not seating charts, not hurt feelings. Ethan. Only Ethan. The thought helped, at least for a little while. Inside the venue, activity buzzed everywhere. Photographers moved between groups. Florists adjusted arrangements. Staff members carried trays through hallways. Lauren Bennett spotted me almost immediately. Relief crossed her face when she saw me. "Martha." She hurried over. "You look beautiful." I smiled. "Thank you." She lowered her voice. "How are you holding up?" The question told me she hadn't forgotten the seating issue. Neither had I, but I forced a smile. "I'll survive." Lauren looked unconvinced. Before she could respond, someone else appeared. Victoria Collins, the queen of appearances herself. She approached wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my first year's mortgage payments. Her smile appeared instantly. Polite, artificial, practiced. "Martha." "Victoria." She looked me up and down. Not obviously. Not enough for others to notice. Just enough for me to notice. The smile remained fixed on her face. "What a lovely dress." There was something about the way she said it. The same way someone might compliment a child for drawing a picture. Technically kind, secretly insulting. I thanked her anyway. Then came the next remark, the one that stung. "I'm glad you chose something understated." Understated. Another word loaded with meaning. Another subtle reminder that I wasn't part of her world. Before I could respond, Brittany appeared, and suddenly every conversation nearby seemed to stop. She looked stunning. There was no denying that. Her gown was breathtaking, her makeup flawless, her hair perfect. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. For a brief moment, I genuinely smiled. Because despite everything, she was marrying my son. And I wanted her to be happy. Then her eyes landed on me. The smile disappeared. Not completely. Just enough. A tiny shift. A flicker. A reaction most people would miss. I didn't. Hi. Martha. Not Mom. Not Martha. It's so good to see you. Just, hi, Martha. I greeted her warmly. She nodded, then looked at my dress. Then, my purse. Then, back at me. The entire exchange lasted maybe 3 seconds. Yet somehow, it felt longer. Much longer. Then she leaned toward Victoria and whispered something. Both women smiled, a strange smile. The kind people exchange when they share a private joke. I pretended not to notice, but I did. Of course I did. Lauren noticed too. I could tell by the look on her face, a look that seemed increasingly common around Brittany. Discomfort. The hours before the ceremony passed quickly. Guests arrived. Music played. Photographers barked instructions. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Eventually, I found Ethan. The moment I saw him, every negative thought disappeared. At least temporarily. He looked handsome, nervous, happy, exactly as a groom should. The second he saw me, his face lit up. Mom. He wrapped me in a hug, a real hug, the kind that reminded me of every version of Ethan that had existed before adulthood. The little boy, the teenager, the young man, all of them somehow still existed inside him. You okay? He asked. I smiled. I'm perfect. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. He pulled back and looked at me carefully. Then he grinned. Dad would have loved today. The words nearly broke me. I nodded. Yes. For a second. Neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my purse. Not for the watch. Not yet. That moment would come later. Instead, I squeezed his hand. I love you. His eyes softened. I love you too. Then someone called him away. Photos, schedules, wedding chaos. The groom disappeared into the crowd, and I watched him go, unaware that within a few hours, the happiest day of his life would become one of the most humiliating moments of mine. Because while Ethan was busy preparing to marry the woman he loved, Brittany was making final adjustments, final decisions. One last calculation about appearances. One last reminder of exactly where she believed I belonged. And very soon, in front of hundreds of guests, she would make that belief painfully clear. The ceremony itself was beautiful, painfully beautiful. The kind of ceremony that would make strangers believe they were witnessing the perfect love story. And the sun hung low above the gardens. Soft music drifted through the air. Guests smiled as they took their seats. And when Ethan walked down the aisle, looking nervous and hopeful, my heart nearly burst with pride. For a little while, I forgot everything else. The insults, the tension, the seating chart, the growing distance between Brittany and me. None of it mattered. Not while I watched my son standing beneath a white floral arch, waiting for the woman he loved. Then Brittany appeared. The crowd collectively inhaled. She looked stunning. Even I couldn't deny it. Her dress shimmered in the afternoon light. Her veil floated behind her. For a moment, she looked exactly like the young bride she wanted the world to see. The ceremony proceeded perfectly. Vows were exchanged. Rings were placed on fingers. Tears appeared in the eyes of family members, including mine, when Ethan said, "I do." I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. When Brittany said, "I do," I prayed silently that she truly meant every promise she was making. Because marriage wasn't a performance, it wasn't a photo shoot, it wasn't a social event. Marriage was what happened after the guests went home, after the music stopped, after the flowers died. I hoped she understood that. I wasn't sure she did. The ceremony ended. Applause erupted. The newlyweds kissed. Guests cheered. Photographers rushed forward. And then everyone moved toward the reception ballroom. The moment that would change everything had finally arrived. At first, everything felt normal. Guests entered through enormous decorated doors. Champagne flowed. Music played softly. Servers moved gracefully between tables. The ballroom looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Thousands of flowers filled the room. Elegant centerpieces decorated every table. Every detail Brittany had dreamed about was there. Every detail I had paid for. Nobody knew that except Lauren and Ethan. And for now, that was fine. I wasn't looking for recognition. I never had been. I simply wanted to celebrate my son's happiness. As guests began finding their assigned tables, I searched for mine. I already knew where it was. Lauren had warned me. But part of me still hoped. Maybe something had changed. Maybe Ethan had discovered the arrangement. Maybe common sense had prevailed. Maybe. Instead, I found table 27 exactly where Lauren said it would be, near the rear of the ballroom, close to the service corridor, far from the family tables, far from the dance floor, far from Ethan. The sight hurt more than I expected, even after days of preparation, even after convincing myself I didn't care. I cared. Of course I cared. I was human. I stood there staring at the seating chart for several seconds, trying to compose myself, trying not to cry, trying not to let anyone see how much it hurt. Then a young hostess approached. "Mrs. Sinclair?" I looked up. "Yes." She smiled nervously. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your seat." There was something uncomfortable in her expression, as though she already knew, as though everyone knew. I followed her through the ballroom, past table after table, past friends, past relatives, past the front section where parents and close family members were supposed to sit. Each step felt heavier than the last. Eventually, we reached the rear corner. The hostess stopped. This is your table? I stared. For a moment, I honestly couldn't speak. The table wasn't just near the staff area. It was practically inside it, behind a decorative pillar, beside a service station, near swinging kitchen doors. Every time the doors opened, guests could hear dishes clattering. I looked around. Several catering employees were standing nearby preparing trays. One of them glanced at me sympathetically. That somehow made everything worse, because sympathy confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't an accident. The hostess shifted awkwardly. "I'm sorry." The words escaped before she could stop them. I looked at her. "You don't need to apologize." But her face told me she wanted to. I thanked her and sat down. Alone. For several moments, I simply stared at the centerpiece. A centerpiece that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The irony almost made me laugh. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Brittany." I turned. She was walking through the ballroom greeting guests, smiling, posing for photos, accepting compliments. Eventually, her eyes landed on me. For a brief second, she hesitated. Then she approached. I already knew this conversation wouldn't end well. "Everything okay?" she asked. The question sounded rehearsed. I looked at her calmly. I was wondering if there had been a mistake. She glanced toward my table, then back at me, and smiled. Actually smiled. No mistake. The answer landed like a stone. I stared at her, waiting, hoping she might explain. She did, just not in the way I expected. "The family tables filled up quickly." I nearly laughed. The lie was so obvious. I had seen empty chairs at 2 different family tables. She knew I had. We both knew. Still, she continued. "And honestly, this seemed like the best place." The best place. I looked around. Kitchen doors, service carts, staff stations. She called this the best place. A few nearby guests had started listening. Not openly, just enough. The way people do when they sense tension. Brittany noticed them too. Yet she kept talking. "I figured you'd be more comfortable here." Comfortable. The word hit harder than everything else, because it revealed the truth. Not the excuse. The truth. She genuinely believed I belonged here. Near the workers. Away from the important guests. Away from the image she wanted to project. Away from her carefully curated version of perfection. For the first time all day, I felt anger. Real anger. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Anger. The kind that rises slowly from years of accumulated disrespect. I could have exposed everything right then. I could have stood up. I could have announced exactly who had funded the wedding. I could have humiliated her in front of everyone. Part of me wanted to. Desperately. But then I thought about Ethan. His smile during the ceremony. His happiness. His future. And I couldn't do it. Not yet. So instead, I took a slow breath, then another, and another. Finally, I looked directly into Brittany's eyes and smiled. A calm smile, the kind she wasn't expecting. "If that's where you want me to sit, Brittany," then that's where I'll sit. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Only briefly. Then it disappeared. She nodded. Thank you for understanding. With that, she turned and walked away, back toward the front of the ballroom, back toward the spotlight, back toward the life she thought she controlled. I watched her leave. Then I quietly took my seat, alone, humiliated, invisible, or so she believed. A few minutes later, one of the catering staff approached carrying a tray. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes widened, then widened even more. He looked from me to the ballroom, then back to me. Suddenly, he seemed confused. Very confused. As though something wasn't making sense. Finally, he leaned closer and spoke softly. Mrs. Sinclair. Yes. The young man's expression turned almost shocked. I thought you'd be sitting up front. I frowned. Why? He glanced around before lowering his voice. Because every vendor here knows you're the one who signed all the payments. And in that moment, I realized something. The truth wasn't as hidden as Brittany thought. Not anymore. For several minutes after the young caterer walked away, I remained frozen in my chair. His words echoed inside my head. Every vendor here knows you're the one who signed all the payments. I stared down at my untouched dinner plate. So the vendors knew. The florist knew. The caterers knew. The musicians knew. The lighting company knew. The photographers knew. Everyone who had actually worked on the wedding knew the truth. Everyone except the guests sitting under the chandeliers. Everyone except the Collins family. And somehow, that made the situation feel even more surreal. I looked around the ballroom. People laughed. Wine glasses clinked. Music drifted through the air. On the dance floor, Ethan and Brittany were smiling for photographs. From a distance, they looked like the perfect newlyweds. Nobody looking at them would have guessed what had happened less than an hour earlier. Nobody would have guessed that the groom's mother was hidden beside the kitchen. Or maybe some people had guessed, because I soon began noticing looks, glances, expressions, the kind people exchange when they sense something isn't right. One elderly woman from Ethan's side of the family approached my table. Aunt Diane? Daniel's cousin? She looked confused. Martha. I smiled. Hi. Diane? She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Why are you sitting back here? There it was. The question. The obvious question. The question everyone else was probably asking too. I forced a small laugh. Oh, you know how weddings are. Her expression told me she didn't believe that answer for a second. Neither would I. She squeezed my shoulder gently, then walked away. I watched her leave. A few minutes later, another relative stopped by. Then another. Then another. Each one looked confused. Each one asked some version of the same question. And each time, I gave some variation of the same lie. It's fine. No big deal. Just a seating adjustment. The more I said it, the less I believed it. Eventually, people stopped asking. But that didn't mean the talking stopped. In fact, that's when the real damage began. Because from my isolated corner near the service area, I could hear conversations other guests probably never would. People speak differently when they think nobody important is listening. And apparently, nobody considered me important. A group of Brittany's relatives sat at a nearby table. They weren't trying to be quiet. Why would they? One woman laughed as she watched the dance floor. Brittany always did aim high. Another woman nodded. That she certainly married well. The first woman shook her head. I think it's the other way around. Several people laughed. I felt my stomach tighten. Then another voice joined the conversation. Ethan got lucky. More laughter. Very lucky. I looked down at my hands. The wedding ring I had worn for 30 years was gone. But the faint mark it left remained. A permanent reminder of love, of commitment, of partnership. I wondered what Daniel would think if he could hear these people. People talking about our son as though he were some charity case. As though he hadn't built his own career, earned his own success, worked his own way through life. One man chuckled. Let's be honest. The Collins family definitely elevated him. The group laughed again. The sound felt like sandpaper against my skin. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk over. I wanted to tell them exactly who Ethan was. The scholarships, the promotions, the sacrifices, the years of hard work. But I stayed silent because the truth was bigger than any argument. And eventually, the truth always finds its way into the light. The problem was that I didn't know how much longer I could endure the darkness first. As the evening continued, speeches began. Victoria spoke. Naturally, she stood beneath a spotlight and delivered a carefully crafted speech about family, love, and blessings. The irony nearly made me laugh. Family, the same woman who had spent months treating me like an inconvenience, the same woman who had allowed her daughter to push me into a corner. Yet there she stood, speaking about unity. The guests applauded enthusiastically. Then Richard gave a shorter speech. His was genuine, simple, heartfelt. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Because unlike Victoria, I wasn't sure he fully understood what had happened. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps years of silence had simply taught him not to fight. Then Ethan stood. The room immediately quieted. My heart swelled with pride. No matter what happened afterward, no one could take this moment from me. My son looked handsome, confident, happy. He spoke about love, partnership, commitment. He thanked friends, family, mentors, people who had helped shape his life. Several times his eyes found mine across the ballroom. Each time he smiled. Each time guilt stabbed through me. Because he still didn't know. He still believed everything was fine. He still believed I was sitting among family, not hidden behind a pillar near the kitchen. I wondered how he would react if he discovered the truth. The thought scared me. Not because of what he might say to Brittany, because of what it might do to him. This day mattered, and despite everything, I still wanted to protect it. Yet, when Ethan finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. I clapped harder than anyone because I wasn't applauding the speech. I was applauding the man he had become, a man I loved more than life itself. Eventually, dinner service began. Servers moved quickly between tables. One of them was the young caterer who had spoken to me earlier. His name tag read Tyler. Each time he passed my table, he looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, during a quiet moment, he stopped beside me. "Mrs. Sinclair?" "Yes." He glanced around carefully, then lowered his voice. "You should know people are starting to talk." I smiled weakly. I figured. "No?" His expression turned serious. "I mean, the vendors." That got my attention. "What about them?" Tyler hesitated. Then he answered. "They're upset." I blinked. "Upset?" He nodded. "The florist saw where you were seated. The photographer, too. And the venue manager." I stared at him. "They know." Tyler looked almost offended by the question. "Of course they know." He leaned closer. "Everyone in the service staff knows who made this wedding possible." A strange feeling moved through me. Not satisfaction. Not exactly. Validation. Perhaps that was the word. For weeks, I had felt invisible. Yet the people actually doing the work had noticed. The people who understood effort. The people who understood sacrifice. They had noticed. Tyler glanced toward the dance floor, then back at me. "I don't think they're going to stay quiet much longer." The statement unsettled me. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, someone called his name. Tyler looked over his shoulder. "I have to go." He started walking away, then suddenly stopped, turned back, and said something that made my pulse quicken. "The venue manager has been trying to reach the primary payer." I frowned. "What for?" Tyler shook his head. "I don't know." Then he disappeared through the service doors. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. The primary payer. Me. Something was happening. Something unexpected. Something serious enough that the venue manager was looking for me during the reception itself. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. I pulled it from my purse. The screen showed a familiar name. Lauren Bennett. As soon as I saw it, a knot formed in my stomach. Because Lauren would never call me during the wedding unless something was wrong. Very wrong. I answered immediately. "Lauren?" Her voice sounded urgent. "Martha, where are you?" "I'm at my table." "Good." A pause. Then, "I need you to come with me right now." My heart began to pound. "Why?" For a second, all I heard was noise in the background. Then Lauren answered, and the words she spoke would set in motion the moment Brittany Collins had spent months unknowingly creating. "We have a problem with the final payment authorization." For a moment after Lauren spoke, I couldn't move. The sounds of the reception continued around me. Music, laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses. Yet everything suddenly felt distant, muted, as if I were hearing it from underwater. "A payment authorization," I repeated. Lauren lowered her voice. "Yes." My stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" She glanced around before answering. "The venue accounting department needs confirmation on one of the final releases." I frowned. "Now?" "Unfortunately, yes." That didn't make sense. Major wedding venues didn't usually interrupt receptions over routine paperwork. Something else was happening. Something bigger. I could hear it in Lauren's voice. She was too calm to be panicked, but too tense to be casual. "I'll be right there," she exhaled. "Thank you." Then she hung up. For several seconds, I remained seated. My eyes drifted toward the dance floor. Ethan was laughing with friends, completely unaware. Brittany stood nearby, posing for photographs. Every camera seemed drawn to her, every spotlight, every smile. The entire evening still revolved around her. But something had changed. I could feel it, like the pressure in the air before a storm. Slowly, I stood. A few guests noticed. Most didn't. To them, I was still just another older woman heading toward the restroom or grabbing another drink. Invisible. That was fine. Invisibility had become familiar. As I crossed the ballroom, I passed several members of the catering staff. A few recognized me. One nodded respectfully. Another offered a small smile. The contrast struck me immediately. The people Brittany considered beneath her treated me with more kindness than she ever had. Lauren was waiting near a side hallway. The moment she saw me, relief crossed her face. "Thank goodness." I looked at her carefully. "Tell me what's really happening." She hesitated, then motioned for me to follow her. We walked through a service corridor away from the guests. The farther we moved from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. Eventually, we reached a private conference room near the venue offices. Several people were already waiting. The venue manager, the accounting director, 2 representatives from the event company, and to my surprise, the lead catering manager. The second I entered, every head turned. The atmosphere immediately shifted. Not because of who I was, because of what they knew. The venue manager stood first. "Mrs. Sinclair." His tone carried respect. Genuine respect. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind earned through years of professionalism. I shook his hand. "What's going on?" He exchanged a glance with the accounting director. Then he answered. "There appears to be some confusion regarding the final authorization." Confusion. Interesting word. "Explain." The accounting director opened a folder. Inside were payment documents, contracts, receipts, approval records. Every major wedding expense sat neatly organized. My signature appeared throughout. The woman looked uncomfortable. "We were informed earlier this evening that someone else intended to assume responsibility for the remaining balance." I blinked. "What?" The venue manager nodded. That's where the issue began. Suddenly, I understood. Or at least part of it. Someone had claimed financial responsibility. Someone who wasn't actually responsible. Who? The room fell silent. The accounting director answered. "Victoria Collins." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I laughed. I genuinely laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The venue manager looked relieved, as though he had been worried I might become angry. Instead, I found the entire situation ridiculous. Victoria. Of course. Even now. Even tonight. Still chasing appearances. Still trying to own a story that wasn't hers. The accounting director continued. She requested copies of several vendor summaries. I nodded slowly. And she implied the remaining authorizations should be directed through her. I crossed my arms. Except she isn't listed anywhere. Correct. The room became quiet again. The venue manager leaned forward. Mrs. Sinclair? We've worked with many families over the years. His voice remained professional. But we're not comfortable altering financial records without direct confirmation from the original sponsor. Original sponsor. Interesting phrase. Not donor. Not contributor. Sponsor. The person who made everything possible. For the first time all evening, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Perspective. Because outside that room, Brittany had spent months constructing a fantasy. A version of reality where her family held all the power. A version where the Sinclairs were lucky participants. A version where I could be moved aside like furniture. Yet inside this room, facts mattered. Paperwork mattered. Reality mattered. And reality looked very different. The venue manager slid a document toward me. We simply need your authorization. I looked down. One signature? That's all. One signature would release the remaining services. The fireworks display, the extended reception package, several final vendor settlements. Everything. I stared at the paper, then slowly set it back down. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The accounting director shifted nervously. Finally, I looked up. Has anyone told Brittany? 4 heads immediately shook no. What about Victoria? Again, no. The silence stretched. Then the catering manager spoke for the first time. Frankly, ma'am, most of us assumed they already knew. I smiled sadly. No. The venue manager frowned. They don't. I shook my head. No. His expression changed instantly. Suddenly, everything made sense to him. The seating arrangement, the confusion, the behavior, the assumptions, all of it. He leaned back in his chair. My God! Nobody disagreed, because there wasn't much to say. The truth had become painfully obvious. A family had spent months enjoying the benefits of generosity while disrespecting the person providing it. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so cruel. The venue manager looked genuinely troubled. Mrs. Sinclair, may I ask you something? I nodded. Why didn't you tell them? The question surprised me. Not because it was unreasonable, because it was so simple. Why hadn't I thought about Ethan, about protecting him, about wanting to avoid conflict, about wanting people to reveal themselves naturally. Eventually, I answered honestly. Because I wanted the wedding to be about my son. The room grew quiet. The catering manager looked away. The accounting director blinked rapidly. Even Lauren looked emotional. Then the venue manager asked the question everyone was secretly wondering. What would you like us to do? There it was. The moment. The moment every revenge story waits for. The moment where the humiliated person gains power. The moment where everyone expects punishment. I looked at the paperwork, then toward the ballroom, toward Ethan, toward the celebration, toward the life he was beginning. And I knew exactly what I wanted. I'll sign. Lauren exhaled. The venue manager nodded. The accounting director visibly relaxed. But before anyone could speak, I added something else. One simple sentence. One sentence that changed the mood of the entire room. However, everyone froze. I looked directly at the venue manager. If anyone asks who authorized this payment, tell them the truth. Silence. Absolute silence. The venue manager stared at me. Lauren stared at me. Everyone stared at me. Not because the request was unreasonable, because it was inevitable. The truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. No speeches. No public humiliation. No dramatic announcements. Just the truth. The venue manager slowly nodded. Understood. I picked up the pen, signed the authorization, and handed it back. At that exact moment, a loud voice echoed from the hallway outside. A familiar voice. A sharp voice. An irritated voice. Victoria Collins. Everyone in the room turned toward the door, and before anyone could react, the handle began to turn. The conference room door swung open. Victoria Collins stepped inside. And the moment she saw me sitting at the table, her expression changed. At first, she looked annoyed, then confused, then suspicious. She clearly hadn't expected to find me there. Behind her stood Brittany, and behind Brittany stood Richard. Apparently, whatever had happened in the ballroom had led them here. For a brief second, nobody spoke. The silence stretched across the room. Heavy, awkward, uncomfortable. Then Victoria recovered. As she always did, she straightened her shoulders and flashed one of her polished social smiles. There you are. She was speaking to the venue manager. Not me. Interesting. The manager remained seated. Mrs. Collins. Victoria walked farther into the room. There seems to be some confusion regarding the financial paperwork. Her voice carried confidence, authority, ownership, the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling situations. Unfortunately for her, facts rarely care about confidence. The manager folded his hands. The matter has already been resolved. Victoria blinked. Oh, yes. She glanced around. Then her eyes landed on the signed authorization document. I watched her expression carefully. She saw the signature. My signature. Recognition flashed across her face, then disappeared. For a moment, she looked genuinely confused, as though her brain refused to process what she was seeing. Martha. The question escaped before she could stop it. I smiled politely. Hello, Victoria. The room remained silent. No one rushed to explain. No one rescued her. For perhaps the first time in her life, Victoria had to face uncertainty without immediate assistance. Her gaze moved from me to the paperwork, then back again. What exactly is going on? The accounting director shifted in her seat. The venue manager answered calmly. We required authorization from the primary financial sponsor. Victoria frowned. The primary sponsor? Nobody spoke. The manager nodded. Correct. Another pause. Then he added, Mrs. Sinclair. The words landed like a thunderclap. Victoria stared. Completely still. Across the room, Brittany's face lost color. Richard looked confused, then surprised, then confused again. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence became almost unbearable. Finally, Victoria laughed. A short, nervous laugh. Oh. Nobody joined her. The laughter died immediately, because nobody in the room considered this funny, especially not the people who had spent months reviewing payment records. Victoria looked toward me again. "Martha, I'm not sure I understand." The sentence sounded strange, almost fragile. I realized something then. For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria genuinely didn't know what to say. She had entered expecting control. Instead, she had found reality. And reality wasn't cooperating. The venue manager opened the folder. Inside were copies of contracts, invoices, payment records. He slid several pages across the table. Victoria looked down. Then her face went pale. One page, then another, then another. Every major payment, every major deposit, every major vendor, my name, my signature, my financial authorization, again and again and again. Beside me, Lauren remained silent, professional, respectful, but I could see the tension in her face. She knew what was happening. Everyone did. Months of assumptions were collapsing in real time. Victoria slowly lowered the paperwork. Her hands were trembling, only slightly, but enough. "This can't be right." The accounting director answered immediately. "It is." Another silence. Longer this time. Much longer. Then Brittany finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" I looked at her, really looked at her. For months, she had avoided seeing me clearly. Now she had no choice. Lauren answered before anyone else could. "Mrs. Sinclair funded the wedding." The room became silent again. No one moved. No one breathed. For several seconds, Brittany simply stared at me, as though I were a stranger, as though everything she believed suddenly made no sense. I suppose that was exactly what she was feeling. Because everything she believed had been wrong. Not partially wrong. Completely wrong. The florist, the venue, the music, the photographers, the catering, the custom decorations, the fireworks scheduled later that evening, the honeymoon package, all of it, every single piece, paid for by the woman she had seated beside the kitchen. I watched realization spread across her face, slowly, painfully, like a crack spreading through glass. "No." The word escaped her lips. Soft. Broken. "No." I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. The paperwork spoke for itself. Richard finally looked toward me. His face carried genuine shock.
"Martha,"
He swallowed.
I had no idea.
For the first time all evening, I believed someone, because unlike Victoria and Brittany, Richard looked honestly stunned. I nodded. "I know." Then Victoria spoke. Her voice sounded different now, smaller, less certain. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" The irony nearly took my breath away. Why didn't anyone tell us, not "thank you," not "I'm sorry," not "how could this happen"? That was her first question. I looked at her carefully, then answered,
Because I never asked for credit.
The words hung in the room, heavy, unavoidable. Lauren looked down. The venue manager looked away. Even the accounting director suddenly seemed fascinated by her paperwork. Nobody wanted to be caught in the emotional blast radius. But nobody could leave either. The truth had finally arrived, and truth demands witnesses. Brittany took a step backward, then another. Her face had become completely pale. She looked like someone trying to wake from a nightmare. Except this wasn't a nightmare. This was reality, and reality doesn't disappear when you open your eyes. Then came the question everyone knew was coming, the question Brittany should have asked months ago. Why? Her voice cracked. I looked at her. What do you mean? Why would you do that? For a moment, I almost laughed. Because the answer was so simple, so obvious, so completely foreign to the worldview she had inherited. I answered quietly, because Ethan is my son. Silence. Absolute silence. Then I continued. I didn't do it for recognition. No response. I didn't do it for praise. Nothing. I didn't do it so people would admire me. Still nothing. I looked directly into Brittany's eyes. I did it because I love him. The words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Because they weren't angry. They weren't cruel. They were true. And truth cuts deeper than humiliation. For the first time since entering the room, Brittany looked ashamed. Truly ashamed. Not embarrassed. Not uncomfortable. Ashamed. A very different thing. Victoria opened her mouth. Closed it. Then opened it again. Apparently searching desperately for something to say. Nothing came. Because there was no defense. Not for this. Not after the seating arrangement. Not after the comments. Not after the months of disrespect. The room remained frozen. Then suddenly, another voice interrupted. A familiar voice. Ethan. Every head turned. My heart stopped. My son stood in the doorway, still wearing his wedding suit, still smiling. At least until he saw our faces. Then the smile vanished. Immediately. He looked from me, to Brittany, to Victoria, to the paperwork, to Lauren, to the venue manager. Confusion flooded his face. What happened? Nobody answered. The silence stretched. Then Ethan looked directly at me, and I saw concern in his eyes. Real concern. The kind that only comes from love. Mom. My stomach tightened, because in that moment, I realized something. The truth wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Brittany had just learned who paid for the wedding. But Ethan was about to learn something far more painful. Where his mother had been sitting all evening. And why? The room fell silent. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that arrives when something important is about to break. Ethan stood in the doorway staring at all of us. His eyes moved from face to face, trying to understand, trying to piece together a puzzle nobody had prepared him for. What's going on? No one answered. Victoria looked down. Richard looked uncomfortable. Brittany looked like she might collapse. Lauren remained perfectly still. The venue manager suddenly seemed fascinated by the carpet. And I wished I could protect my son from what was coming. But some truths arrive whether we're ready or not. "Ethan," I said softly. He immediately walked toward me. The concern in his face nearly broke my heart. "Mom, are you okay?" Of everyone in the room, he looked at me first. Not Brittany, not the paperwork. Me, the same way he always had. I forced a smile. "I'm fine." He frowned. "No, you're not." His gaze shifted toward the documents, then toward Brittany. "What happened?" Again. Nobody spoke. Finally, Lauren stepped forward. Her voice remained calm, professional, but there was sadness in it. "Ethan, there was confusion regarding the final payment authorization." He blinked. "Okay." Then he looked at me, suddenly understanding part of it. "Mom signed it." Lauren nodded. "Yes." A brief pause. Then, "The venue needed confirmation from the primary financial sponsor." Ethan's face tightened, because unlike Brittany and Victoria, he already knew exactly what that meant. He knew who the primary sponsor was. He looked around the room, slowly, carefully, and he realized everyone else had just learned the truth. His expression changed immediately. Not embarrassment, not shame, protectiveness. The same emotion I had spent 34 years feeling for him, now reflected back at me. "What happened?" he asked again. This time, his voice was firmer. Nobody answered. I could almost hear everyone's thoughts. Nobody wanted to be the one who said it. Nobody wanted to speak the words aloud. Because once spoken, they could never be taken back. Ethan looked directly at Brittany. "Brittany," she swallowed. "What happened?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she still couldn't speak. For several seconds, she stared at the floor, then at me, then back at Ethan. Still nothing. The silence told him more than any explanation could. His face hardened. Slowly, noticeably. Then his eyes landed on Lauren. And Lauren, unfortunately, was incapable of lying. "Lauren," she hesitated. Ethan stepped closer. "What happened?" A long pause. Then Lauren answered. Carefully. Truthfully. The seating arrangement became an issue. I saw confusion flash across Ethan's face. "What seating arrangement?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Lauren delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Your mother wasn't seated with the family." The room froze completely. Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. As though he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" Lauren lowered her eyes. "She was seated near the service area." For several seconds. Ethan simply stared, his brain refusing to process the information. Then he laughed. A short laugh. Disbelieving. No. Nobody responded. His smile disappeared. Immediately. No. This time, it wasn't laughter. It was denial. Pure denial. He turned toward me. Mom. I wanted to help him, wanted to soften the truth, wanted to protect him, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I nodded. Slowly. His face lost color. Where? The question came out almost as a whisper. I swallowed. Near the back. His eyes widened, then widened further. Near the back. Nobody answered. He looked toward Lauren, then the venue manager, then the accounting director. Every face confirmed the same thing, the truth. Suddenly, Ethan looked at Brittany, and the room changed. The atmosphere shifted instantly. I had never seen that expression on my son's face before. Not once in his entire life. Not anger, not exactly. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. The kind that hurts more than rage. Brittany. Her shoulders trembled. She couldn't look at him. Look at me. His voice remained calm. That somehow made it worse. Slowly, Brittany raised her eyes, and Ethan asked the question, the one she couldn't escape. Did you do that? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she still didn't answer. The silence itself became an answer, a devastating one. Ethan stared at her, then asked again, Did you do that? Finally, she nodded, the smallest movement imaginable. Yet somehow it felt enormous. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Because now it was real. Now it had been acknowledged. Now there was nowhere left to hide. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a second, then opened them again. When he spoke, his voice sounded different, older, sadder. Why? Brittany immediately started crying. I didn't mean, why? The question came again, stronger, more direct. No escape, no excuses, no distractions. Just one simple question. Why Brittany wiped her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Ethan stared at her. What wasn't supposed to be like this? She looked toward Victoria. A mistake. A very revealing mistake. Ethan noticed instantly. So did everyone else. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely afraid. Brittany. Ethan's voice remained steady. Answer me. More tears. More silence. Then finally, I thought it would look better. The words echoed through the room. Look better. Not feel better. Not make sense. Not help anyone. Look better. The phrase perfectly summarized months of behavior, months of choices, months of priorities. Everything reduced to 2 words. Look better. I watched Ethan absorb them, and I saw the exact moment his heart broke. Not because of the seating arrangement, because of what it revealed. The values behind it, the thinking behind it, the person behind it, his wife. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then I finally did, because this had gone far enough. Ethan. He looked toward me immediately, always. No matter how old he became, always. I smiled gently. It's okay. His expression tightened. No. Sweetheart? No? The word came out harder than intended. Then he immediately softened. But not much. He looked around the room, then back at me. And for the first time all evening, emotion appeared in his eyes. Real emotion. Pain. I didn't know. The words nearly shattered me because I believed him completely. I know. His voice cracked. Mom, I swear to God, I didn't know. I know. He looked devastated, like a child who had accidentally allowed someone to hurt the person he loved most. Then he turned back toward Brittany, and suddenly the room became very quiet again, because everyone sensed what was coming next. Everyone, including Brittany, including Victoria, including me. Ethan stood perfectly still, then spoke slowly, carefully, clearly. If my mother was important enough to help build this wedding, he paused. Then she should have been important enough to sit with her family. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then he took another step toward Brittany and delivered the sentence that changed the entire direction of the evening. I think you owe my mother an apology. Not private, not later, not tomorrow, not eventually. Now, right here, in front of everyone. And judging by the look on Brittany's face, she knew exactly what he meant. Because for the first time all night, she wasn't facing me. She was facing the consequences of her own choices. For a long moment after Ethan spoke, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody looked away. The entire room seemed suspended in time. I think you owe my mother an apology. The sentence hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. Brittany stood, frozen. Tears streaked her makeup. Her hands trembled at her sides. But she didn't speak. Not immediately. I could almost see the battle happening inside her. Pride fighting reality. Image fighting truth. The version of herself she wanted everyone to see fighting the person she had actually become. Ethan waited, patiently, silently. That somehow made everything harder. Because he wasn't yelling. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't humiliating her. He was simply asking her to face what she had done. And that is often far more difficult. Finally, Brittany swallowed. Then looked at me. I'm sorry. The words came out quickly, almost automatically, like something memorized, something rehearsed, something said because it was required, not because it was felt. Everyone in the room recognized it immediately, including Ethan, including me. The apology landed like a feather, weightless, meaningless. Ethan's face hardened slightly. Brittany. She looked at him. His disappointment was impossible to miss. That's not enough. Fresh tears appeared. What do you want me to say? The question escaped before she could stop it, and the moment it did, I saw regret flash across her face, because she realized how it sounded. Defensive, resentful, still focused on herself, not on what she had done. Ethan took a slow breath, then another. He looked exhausted, heartbroken, and older than he had an hour earlier. I don't want you to say anything. His voice remained calm. I want you to understand. Silence. Then Brittany looked away, toward Victoria. Again. And that was when something interesting happened. For the first time all evening, Ethan noticed it fully. Every time Brittany struggled, she looked at her mother. Every time she needed guidance, she looked at Victoria. Every time she searched for validation, she looked at Victoria. The pattern suddenly became obvious. Not just to Ethan, to everyone. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. She knew it too. Brittany. Ethan spoke softly. Why do you keep looking at your mother? Nobody moved. The question hit its target immediately. Brittany froze. Victoria froze. Even Richard looked surprised. The silence stretched. Then Ethan asked again. Why? No answer. The room grew heavier. Finally, Brittany whispered, Because. Her voice cracked. She stopped. Started again. Because she's always taught me how things are supposed to be. The words seemed harmless at first. Then their meaning settled over the room. Victoria closed her eyes, just briefly, as though she already knew what was coming next. Ethan stared. What does that mean? Another pause. Another hesitation. Another moment where Brittany could have stopped. Could have hidden. Could have protected herself. Instead, something inside her finally broke. And once it broke, the truth started pouring out. My whole life. Tears spilled down her cheeks. My whole life, I've been told that appearances matter. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. She looked at the floor, then continued. I was taught that successful people look a certain way. Her voice shook. Act a certain way. More tears. Live a certain way. The room remained silent. Then she looked toward me. For the first time that night, really looked at me. Not my clothes, not my age, not my social status. Me. When I met you. She swallowed hard. I judged you. The honesty startled everyone, including me. Saw your house. Her voice broke. I saw your clothes. Another tear. I saw your old car. More silence. And I decided who you were. The words landed with devastating force. Because they were true. Painfully true. No excuses. No disguises. No manipulation. Just truth. For the first time, all evening, Brittany wasn't defending herself. She was exposing herself. And there is a difference, a very important difference. Ethan remained completely still, listening, absorbing, trying to understand the woman he had married. Then Brittany looked toward Victoria, and what she said next changed everything. "You taught me that." Victoria's face drained of color. "Brittany, no." The interruption surprised everyone, especially Victoria, because Brittany had never interrupted her before. Not like that. Not publicly. Not directly. Tears streamed down Brittany's face. "I need to say this." Victoria looked stunned, completely stunned. Then Brittany continued. "When I was little, you used to point at people." The room grew even quieter. "You'd tell me which neighborhoods mattered." No response. "Which schools mattered." Still nothing. "Which families mattered." Victoria stared at her daughter, speechless. And Brittany kept going. "You always said people judge you by who you associate with." Richard lowered his head, as though hearing truths he'd known for years. Truths he'd simply never challenged. "You taught me to admire wealth." Tears. "You taught me to chase status." More tears. "You taught me to fear being ordinary." The final words shattered something, not just in Brittany, in Victoria too, because suddenly everyone could see it. The source, the origin, the inheritance, not money, not property, values, the wrong values, passed from one generation to the next. For the first time since I'd met her, Victoria looked vulnerable. Not angry, not arrogant, vulnerable. She opened her mouth, then closed it, apparently realizing she had no defense. Because how do you defend years of teaching your child to measure human worth through appearances? You don't. You simply face it. The way Brittany was finally facing it. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. Something nobody expected. Victoria's shoulders slumped, just slightly, but enough. And suddenly, she looked older, much older. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying the weight of choices she'd spent years avoiding. "I only wanted the best for you." Her voice sounded small, almost fragile. Brittany laughed through tears, a heartbreaking laugh. "No." The word came softly. "No, Mom." Silence. "You wanted me to be impressive." Victoria flinched. The reaction was immediate, because the statement was true, and truth always finds the wound. Brittany wiped her eyes, then looked directly at me. The room disappeared. At least that's how it felt. No venue manager, no wedding planner, no accounting staff, no Ethan. Just Brittany and me. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. When the words finally came, they sounded completely different than before. No performance, no image, no calculation, only pain. "Martha." Her voice cracked. And somehow, hearing my name spoken that way hurt more than all the insults combined. Because this time, it was sincere. "I treated you horribly." The room remained silent. I judged you. Another tear. I looked down on you. More silence. I humiliated you. Her shoulders shook. And you never deserved any of it. Those words finally carried weight. Real weight. The kind apologies are supposed to carry. Not because they erase damage, because they acknowledge it. Then Brittany said something that surprised everyone, including herself. I think I became the kind of person I always claimed to hate. The room went completely still, and in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't a villain collapsing. This was a human being waking up, painfully, publicly, but genuinely. The question was no longer whether Brittany felt sorry. The question was whether that sorrow would be enough to rebuild what had been broken. And standing beside her, Ethan looked as though he was wondering exactly the same thing.
For several seconds after Brittany finished speaking, nobody said a word. The room felt completely different now. Not because the facts had changed, because the masks had. The polished image Brittany had spent years protecting was gone. The flawless daughter, the sophisticated bride, the woman who always appeared confident and in control. All of it had cracked. And underneath stood a frightened young woman finally confronting herself. I looked at her carefully. The tears, the trembling hands, the ruined makeup, the shame. For the first time since I had met her, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't performing. She wasn't calculating. She was simply being honest. And honesty, even when it arrives late, deserves to be acknowledged. Not rewarded, not excused, acknowledged. The venue manager quietly stood. So, should we give you some privacy? I glanced around the room. At Lauren, at the accounting director, at the catering manager, at everyone who had unwillingly become witnesses to this family reckoning. I smiled gently. Thank you. Within moments, they began filing out. Lauren squeezed my shoulder as she passed. A silent gesture. One woman supporting another. Soon, only 5 people remained. Me, Ethan, Brittany, Victoria, Richard. No audience. No employees. No outsiders. Just family. Or at least the complicated version of family we were becoming. The silence lingered. Then Ethan spoke. His voice was calmer than I expected. I'm hurt. The words weren't directed at anyone specifically, yet everyone knew exactly who they were for. Brittany lowered her eyes. I know. Ethan nodded slowly. I think that's the hardest part. His voice cracked slightly. You knew how much my mother means to me. Nobody moved. You knew everything she sacrificed. More silence. You knew how much I love her. Brittany's tears returned immediately. And you still did it. There was no accusation in his tone, only heartbreak. That somehow made it worse. Because anger can fade. Disappointment lingers. Brittany covered her mouth, unable to speak, unable to defend herself, unable to escape the truth. Finally, she whispered, I know. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. then nodded, as though accepting that nothing more needed to be said. Because some mistakes cannot be explained away, only owned. I watched both of them, the young couple standing at the beginning of a marriage, and I realized something. This moment would define them far more than the wedding itself. Not the flowers, not the photographs, not the decorations. This, how they handled failure, how they handled truth, how they handled each other. That was what mattered. I took a slow breath, then stood. Immediately, Ethan looked at me, concern flooding his face. "Mom!" I smiled. "It's okay." He shook his head. "No." "Yes." I stepped closer. "No, sweetheart." I placed my hand against his cheek. "The seating arrangement hurt." His jaw tightened. "I know." "The comments hurt." A nod. "I know." "The assumptions hurt." Another nod. "I know." I smiled sadly. But none of those things are what hurt the most. Everyone looked at me, especially Brittany, waiting, listening. I turned toward her and spoke the truth. What hurt most was believing you never even tried to know me. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks because she understood immediately. The issue had never been a chair. Never. The chair was only the symbol. The real wound was deeper. Far deeper. I continued. "You judged me before you understood me." Silence. "You decided my value before learning my story." More silence. "You saw an older woman in modest clothes and assumed you knew everything." Brittany looked shattered. And honestly, that was enough. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need humiliation. I didn't need punishment. Because shame was already doing its work. Then something unexpected happened. Victoria stepped forward. All eyes turned toward her. For the first time since I had met her, she looked uncertain. No superiority. No arrogance. No social performance. Just uncertainty. "Martha." The sound of my name coming from her felt strange. Different. Human. She swallowed hard, then continued. "I owe you an apology, too." Nobody interrupted. Nobody reacted. We simply listened. Victoria's eyes glistened. Only slightly. But enough. "I spent years teaching Brittany the wrong things." The admission seemed physically painful. "As much as I'd like to blame someone else." Her voice faltered. "I can't." Silence. "I taught her to care too much about appearances." Richard lowered his head. Victoria looked toward her daughter, then back at me. "And I think I forgot that character matters more." The room remained still. I didn't know whether the lesson would last. I didn't know whether Victoria would truly change. People rarely transform overnight. But for the first time, she was at least facing herself honestly. That mattered. Then Brittany suddenly stepped toward me. Slowly. carefully, like someone approaching sacred ground. "Martha," her voice trembled. "I can't undo what I did." "No." "I can't erase it." "No." More tears. "But I want to spend the rest of my life doing better." The words hung in the air. Simple, not dramatic, not perfect, just honest. I studied her face for a long moment, looking for manipulation, looking for performance, looking for calculation. I found none, only regret and hope, fragile hope. The kind that exists when someone finally realizes they need to become better than they were yesterday. Then I did something nobody expected, including me. I opened my arms. Brittany froze, completely frozen. Then she began crying all over again and stepped forward. The hug wasn't magical. It didn't erase everything. It didn't fix months of hurt. Real life doesn't work that way. But it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings matter more than endings. When she finally stepped back, I reached into my purse. Everyone looked confused, especially Ethan. Slowly, I removed the small velvet box, the same box I had carried all day, the same box that belonged to Daniel, my husband, Ethan's father. The room immediately became quiet, because everyone sensed the significance. I handed it to Ethan. His eyes widened. "Mom." "Open it." Carefully, he lifted the lid. The gold pocket watch gleamed beneath the lights. Instantly, tears filled his eyes. He recognized it. Of course he did. He had seen it as a child. He had asked about it 100 times. "Dad's watch." I nodded. "Your father carried it every day." His hands trembled. I smiled. "And now, it's yours." For several seconds, Ethan couldn't speak. Then he hugged me, tightly, the way he had when he was a little boy. And for a moment, the years disappeared. The wedding disappeared. The conflict disappeared. Everything disappeared. Except love. When we finally stepped apart, I glanced toward Brittany. She was crying again. But this time, the tears looked different. Less shame, more gratitude. Then she did something nobody expected. She turned toward Ethan, took his hand, and smiled weakly. "I need to fix something." Before anyone could ask what she meant, she walked toward the door, determined, focused, certain. A few minutes later, we followed her back into the ballroom. And the moment we entered, every guest looked up, confused, curious, wondering what had happened. Brittany walked directly to the center of the room, took the microphone, and then did something nobody in that ballroom would ever forget. She publicly gave back the seat she had taken away. The ballroom gradually fell silent as Brittany walked toward the center of the room. A microphone trembled slightly in her hands. Hundreds of guests watched, some confused, some curious, some sensing that something important had happened behind the scenes. The music faded. Conversation stopped. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Everyone was waiting. I stood beside Ethan near the entrance. The antique gold pocket watch rested safely in his jacket pocket. For the first time all evening, he wasn't looking at the guests. He was watching Brittany, carefully, hopefully, nervously, as if he too was waiting to discover who she would choose to become. Brittany took a breath, then another, and finally spoke. "I need everyone's attention for just a moment." Her voice echoed through the ballroom. The room became completely still. She glanced toward me, then back at the guests. "I owe someone an apology." Murmurs spread immediately. A few people exchanged confused looks. Victoria lowered her head. Richard stared quietly at the floor. Neither seemed surprised anymore. Brittany swallowed hard, then continued. "Tonight, I made a terrible mistake." The whispers grew louder. Not dramatically, just enough. People sensed something real was happening. Something unscripted. Something that hadn't been planned by wedding coordinators or photographers. For perhaps the first time all day, authenticity had taken the stage. Brittany's eyes found mine, and she spoke clearly enough for every guest to hear. "My mother-in-law should have been seated with family." A wave of confusion swept across the room. People immediately turned toward me, toward the back, toward the area near the service station. Suddenly, everyone understood, or at least part of it. Brittany continued. "Instead, because of my own arrogance, I placed her near the staff area." Gasps, whispers, shocked expressions. I saw several relatives exchange stunned looks. Aunt Diane looked furious. Several members of Ethan's family appeared ready to march directly toward Brittany. The only reason they didn't was because Brittany kept talking. I judged her. Silence. I judged her without knowing her. More silence. I judged her based on appearances. The words seemed painful for her to say, which was probably why they mattered. Then came the moment nobody expected. Not even me. Brittany stepped down from the stage, walked directly across the ballroom, and stopped in front of me. The room remained silent. Every eye followed her. Every camera. Every guest. Slowly, she extended her hand. Not as a performance, not as a gesture, as an invitation. "Martha," her voice shook. "Would you please come sit where you should have been all along?" For a moment, I couldn't move, not because I was overwhelmed, because I was remembering the humiliation, the loneliness, the hurt, all of it. And yet somehow, standing there in front of hundreds of people, Brittany looked more vulnerable than I had ever felt sitting beside that kitchen door. I looked into her eyes, then took her hand. The room erupted into applause. Not the loud celebratory applause of a wedding. Something deeper, warmer, more human. The applause of people witnessing accountability. The applause of people witnessing someone choose humility over pride. Together we walked toward the family table. Not quickly, not dramatically, simply together. And for the first time all day, I sat beside my son, where I belonged, Ethan immediately stood and pulled out my chair. The simple gesture nearly brought me to tears. Then he kissed my forehead, just like he had when he was younger, just like he always did. The applause slowly faded. Music returned. Conversations resumed. But something had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter, more honest, less performative. The rest of the reception unfolded differently than anyone expected. People laughed more genuinely. Conversations became less superficial. Even Victoria seemed quieter, more reflective. At one point, she approached my table. Alone. No audience. No performance. Just the two of us. Martha. I looked up. She hesitated, apparently finding apologies difficult. Good. They should be difficult. Eventually, she managed to say, "I'm sorry." Nothing elaborate, nothing dramatic, just sincere. I appreciated that, because sometimes simple truth matters more than perfect words. I nodded. Thank you. She looked relieved. Not forgiven, not absolved, simply relieved to have finally told the truth. Later that evening, the fireworks illuminated the night sky. The same fireworks I had unknowingly approved months earlier. Ethan stood between Brittany and me as we watched. For the first time, it felt like a family. An imperfect one. A complicated one. But a real one. And honestly, that was enough. The wedding eventually ended. Guests departed. The ballroom emptied. Life moved forward, as it always does. But the real ending didn't happen that night. It happened 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, at my house. The little house outside Columbus. The same house where Ethan had grown up. The same house where I had spent decades sewing clothes and paying bills and building a life. I was baking blueberry muffins when the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Ethan had called earlier. When I opened the door, Ethan and Brittany stood together on the porch. No wedding dress. No tuxedo. No photographers. No audience. Just two people. The way real life looks after celebrations end. Hi, Mom. I smiled. Come in. They followed me into the kitchen. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work. The honeymoon. The weather. Nothing important. Then Brittany looked down at her hands. And I knew this was why they had come. Finally, she spoke. I needed to say something. I sat quietly, listening, not rescuing her, not helping. This was hers to do. She took a deep breath, then looked directly at me. So sorry. The words sounded different than they had at the wedding. No audience, no pressure, no expectations, just sincerity. I don't think I understood how much damage I was causing. Tears appeared again, but softer this time, quieter. I kept seeing categories. She shook her head. Successful. More tears. Important. Another pause. Wealthy. Then worthy. The final word barely escaped her lips. I understood immediately, because that had always been the problem. Not money. Worth. She had confused the two. Many people do. I was wrong. I nodded. Yes, she actually laughed through her tears. A sad little laugh. Then she smiled, and somehow that honesty made me trust her more. Finally, I told her something I had never said before. I didn't pay for the wedding because I wanted respect. Both she and Ethan looked at me. I paid for it because I didn't want my son beginning marriage under financial pressure. The kitchen became quiet. I wasn't buying gratitude. I smiled softly. I was protecting Ethan. Fresh tears filled Brittany's eyes because she finally understood not just what I had done, why I had done it. Love. Simple love. The kind that doesn't need recognition. The kind that gives without keeping score. Eventually, Brittany stood, walked around the table, and hugged me. Not cautiously, not formally, like family. This time, I hugged her back without hesitation. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness means deciding that pain doesn't get the final word. As they left later that afternoon, Ethan turned at the door. "Love you, Mom." I smiled. "Love you too." Brittany hesitated, then smiled as well. "Love you too, Martha." For the first time, the words felt real, and as I watched them drive away, I realized something. The wedding hadn't been the story. The seating chart hadn't been the story. The money hadn't been the story. The story had always been about something much simpler. The difference between judging a person and knowing a person, and how much healing becomes possible once we finally learn the difference. Sometimes the deepest wounds do not come from loud insults, but from quiet disrespect. A changed seat. A cold glance. A dismissive comment. Those small things can tell someone they are not valued. But this story reminds us that a person's worth is never measured by money, clothing, status, or the table where someone tries to place them. Martha Sinclair did not pay for the wedding to be praised. She did it out of love. And that is what real family often does. Real love gives quietly. Real love sacrifices without needing applause. But love should never mean accepting humiliation. Kindness is beautiful, but kindness also needs boundaries. Brittany's lesson was painful, but necessary. She learned that judging people by appearances can blind us to their sacrifice, wisdom, and heart. And Martha learned that silence can protect peace for a while. But truth must eventually stand up. If this story touched your heart, please comment below. What would you have done if you were Martha? Would you have stayed silent, walked out, or revealed the truth immediately? Please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who believes dignity matters. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear your thoughts.